Hey guys, and welcome back. So in this nugget right here, what we're going to be talking about is the startup configurations for our system. And what we are really going to be focusing on is something called SysVinit. Now here is the deal. When you start on your computer, certain services are going to have to be started. Maybe you want to have particular web servers running, maybe an Nginx server, maybe you want to have access to a graphical user interface to manage your system. All of these processes have to be controlled, and the original way to control such processes was using SysVinit. Now, one of the main features that we have to understand with respect to SysVinit is the concept of run levels. So let's actually discuss the process in action then. So when a SysVinit system happens to boot up, the very first, i.e. the number one process started by the kernel is something called init. This will always be the very first process started by SysVinit. Now this process itself, init, this is used to start all other processes. It's going to initialize all the other processes, so to speak. Now, what processes are going to be started is going to be determined by this run level concept we're talking about here. Or rather, we're going to talk about, should I say, that we're just going to dig into. So what exactly do I mean when I talk about a run level? Well, really, a run level is just like a category. And this category is going to have particular services associated with it. So let's maybe just say you want to have a graphical user interface so that not everything is just managed via the CLI. You want to be able to click and you want to be able to drag and drop. Well, the ability to have such a graphical user interface, like I say, will be defined within a particular run level, and we'll get to see what those run levels are very, very shortly. What is also important to know is that you yourself can actually define what services and features are available in each run level. So if you want to be able to control and do some type of modification, that absolutely is possible for you as a system administrator. Now, we do have three different sets of run levels that we have to be aware of. The very first one is called the Linux standard base, okay? Now the second one is just called the Red Hat set, and the third one is called the Debian set. Now quite honestly, the standard set, this is not really used quite so much, but it's good for historical purposes. It lets you know why run levels were developed in the first place. It gives you a sense of what they began with when they were developing this concept. But the reality is we have two different modes of thought. If you happen to have a Debian based system, it makes sense that we're going to be using a Debian set, and if you have a Red Hat based system, such as maybe say Rocky Linux or CentOS, then you would follow the Red Hat set. Now these actual run levels are pretty similar across these different definitions, but there are some slight variations. Let's actually talk about the run levels with respect to each different set. So the very first run level we want to talk about is run level 0. Now within the Linux standard base, as well as the Red Hat set and the Debian set, the definition of run level 0 is exactly the same across all three. We have no variation at all. Ultimately, whether we're using Red Hat or Debian or anything else, if we use run level 0, this is going to halt the system. And when I say to halt the system, that just means to shut down the system. So run level 0 across all definitions, going to do the same thing, shut down the system. Now, similarly, with respect to the next run level, which is run level 1, this is also the same across all definitions in the Linux standard base and the Red Hat set and the Debian set. No matter what we're using, this is going to invoke what is called single user mode. So think about this. We know that we can have the concept of multiple users on our system. Let's maybe say we had the user John, and we had the user Simona, and the user Trevor, as well as the administrator called root. If we happen to specify that our system uses run level 1, we know this is going to be single user mode. That means if John tried to log into the system, he would not be able to. if Simona tried to log into the system, she would not be able to, and likewise, Trevor would also be locked out. The only person, the single user who can log into the system, will be that root administrator. So run level 1, no matter what your definition, is going to lock down the system to only be accessed by the administrator. So this is really all about locking down the system and limiting access to only the person with the highest priorities available. Now, the next run level we have is run level 2. So we can see we're just incrementing these numbers, 0, 1, 2. And there is a little bit of a difference between the definitions right here. When we are talking about the Linux standard base, what run level 2 gives us, it gives us multi-user mode. So that would mean that John and Simona and Trevor could all log on to the system, but there would be no networking. Okay, so this means if they want to log into their Gmail account, there's going to be no network access. They can just access the system without being able to connect to any other systems or computers. Also, it's worth noting that run level 2 means that we do not get a graphical user interface. So whilst we can grant multiple users access to the system, all of those users must work directly from the command line. Now, with respect to Red Hat based systems, run level 2, very similar. It's going to be multi-user mode, but with no ability for network file sharing. And similarly, no ability for a graphical user interface. So very similar in that respect. No network file sharing. Everything must be done via the CLI, but multiple users can log on to the system. So Trevor, John, and Simona are going to be able to access the system at run level 2. Now the difference here, and this one is quite a stark difference, is that with the Debian sets at run level 2, we do get multi-user mode. However, networking is not disabled. We do have networking, and we also have a graphical user interface. And in fact, for run levels 2, 3, 4, and 5 for Debian systems, this definition is exactly the same. So run level 2, run level 3, run level 4, and run level 5 for Debian-based systems are all going to act in this manner. Multi-user, with network access, with a graphical user interface. So keep that in mind. So now as we progress to run level 3, we already know what that is going to look like for Debian systems. But what about with the Linux standard base? Well, for Linux standard base, as well as our Red Hat systems, this is going to be the exact same definition. We're going to get multi-user mode, and just like before, we're not going to get a graphical user interface, but we will have network access. In fact, let me just write that a little bit clearer. So run level 3, LSB and Red Hat, similar to the previous run level, but this time we do have network access. We can share files, we can talk to different computers, we can access the internet, so on and so forth. Now, run level 4. With respect to run level 4 for the LSB, this is actually not defined. There is no run level 4 for the Linux standard base. However, run level 4 for Red Hat based systems is exactly the same as run level 3. So carbon copy right here. And as we know with Debian based systems, 2, 3, 4 and 5 are all exactly the same. And this is the part which I find a little bit frustrating, because ultimately I just feel this is unnecessarily confusing. Why have multiple run levels that do the exact same thing? Sometimes I feel they're just trying to make the exam a little bit more difficult to remember stuff, but like I say, I can't control this. This just is the way it is. So again, we move on. We go to run level 5. In the case of the Linux standard base, this is going to be a multi-user mode, so we can have multiple users, and we're going to get networking, and we're going to get that graphical user interface. And with Red Hat based systems, same type of deal. We're going to get multi-user mode, we're going to get our networking access, and finally we're going to get our graphical user interface for Red Hat based systems. And for Debian, as we know, 2, 3, 4 and 5 all exactly the same. And now we come to the last run level. This is run level 6. And you will be pleased to know that this is exactly the same across all definitions. Whether it's Linux standard base, Red Hat or Debian, run level 6 will always reboot the system. So run level 0, that will shut down the system, run level 6, that will reboot the system, and 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, depending on the definition, will give you some combination of a CLI or a graphical user interface. It will toggle single users and multi-users and give different definitions depending on the network access available. Now, one thing to note is that you actually can define additional run levels at run level 7, 8, and 9, but there are no standards for these run levels, so there are no defaults defined. Now, just a word on the applicability of these run levels. Of course, run level 0 will be used if we want to shut down a system. Similarly, run level 6 to reboot a system, also very, very useful. Let's talk about run level 1 though. Now, run level 1 is kind of like safe mode on your system, so to speak. This is being kind of designed to fix really bad problems. So if you are troubleshooting some type of serious issue on your machine, you want to boot up with minimal processes with only access to the root user so that you can fix these critical issues. Say, for example, you may have a particular virus running on your system, which is running on a particular process. You want to boot the system up with limited processes with only one user to go in and try to fix that problem. This is where you would want to be using run level 1. Now, run level 2, on Red Hat systems, this is not really used very often. That is simply because networking is so, well, vital to the day-to-day operations of a system administrator. So just disabling the networking, not quite so common. Whereas on a Debian-based system, we know run level 2 actually does allow us to get networking access, so it would be much more common on that type of distribution. Now, run level 3, at least in the Red Hat definition, whereby we do not get a graphical user interface. This is very common to run on servers. Now, the reason why is because it's more lightweight, so we don't need to have as much intensive processing power, and also it reduces the attack surface. Simply put, the more processes and more applications running on your system, the more potential for an attacker to find a vulnerability in a particular application or a particular process and gain access to the system. So to limit things, servers are often run without the graphical user interface. And for Red Hat based systems, we know we can do this on a run level 3. Whereas run level 5, this does provide a graphical user interface. This is a common run level for client desktop computers, whereby the average user wants to have the ability to drag and drop and to access their system in a nice, friendly manner with this graphical user interface. Run level 5 would be the run level for that scenario. So that is us for our introduction into SysVinit and the run levels. What I now want to talk to you about is some configuration files with respect to our run levels. And well, that's what we'll be talking about in the very next nuggets. I hope this has been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.